say you've written a story and you've decided to publish it through Amazon. You've pressed that button which releases it like a wild boar into readership land. But maybe you haven't looked at the story for a little while, maybe a few weeks or a couple of months. You decide to just scan through it to make sure you refresh your memory. And when you do that, you discover that you've made a typo. This is the moment that you realise you should have hired a proofreader. Hello, I'm Jules and I make videos on children's book publishing, and also I do tutorials for art. That means that if you want to illustrate your own book, then you can too. If this kind of thing floats your boat, then make sure you subscribe and ding the bell next to it so you get notifications of all of my uploads, which come out every Friday. You can check out my website and my Patreon for my flagship course, which is called Make a Picture Book Step by Step, and all the details will be in the description box below. In this video, we're going to discover why it is you need a proofreader, what they do and what they don't do. A proofreader is somebody who looks through copy, that's the words of your text, your story, and makes sure that it's free of errors. They will find typographical or grammatical or spelling errors, and will also look out for things to do with your formatting. Proofreaders need to have the patience of a saint because it can be long and tedious work. Concentrating, taking every line in that you've written. They can often spot a spelling mistake at 50 paces and will have a very special relationship with the English language. You might be thinking, well, I've read my text like 100 times. It's fine, there are no spelling errors. I don't need to run it past somebody else, particularly if I've got to pay for it. Well, have you ever heard of something called writer's blindness? It's when you write a sentence and your brain is thinking one thing, but your hand is writing something completely different. The weird thing is, when you read that sentence back, you don't see the error. You could read it 50 more times, but because your brain has convinced you that you wrote down the thing you thought you wrote down, you just don't see the mistake. I have done this. At a very early stage in my author career, I wrote down a sentence that said, "They were all so excited." Now, you wouldn't think that you could really go wrong with that, but what I'd actually written was, "They were all so excited." So I had two so's in there, one of which I did not need. It wasn't until a lot later, when my writer's blindness had subsided, and after I had bought about 20 or 30 copies, that I realised the mistake I'd made. A few of them had gone out to friends and family, and the rest of them I couldn't bring myself to sell. So I'm afraid they all had to be pulped. It was all so annoying. I've also asked friends and relatives if they could read through my text before I go to print. And although this is really helpful to a point, they don't have that sort of pinpoint accuracy that a proofreader does. I'm really lucky that I have a teacher friend who has a really good grasp of English, and she has looked at some of my texts before and been very helpful at pointing out some very daft mistakes that I've made. However, I have also used a proofreader, and yes, it has cost me some money, but goodness me, am I glad I did. So how much is it going to cost you? Well, of course, it depends on how much they are going to have to read. In the US, you're likely to be charged somewhere in the region of $25 to $50. But proofreaders can also charge by the amount of 1,000 words or by the whole project. When I looked at UK proofreaders, one of the people that I was looking at per 1,000 words was charging anywhere between £13 and £35 for the 1,000 words. Picture books should be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words. So for people in that genre, there is a distinct positive cost implication. For authors that are writing for older children or even novels, make sure you budget a bit more. But why is it important? So what if I forget a capital letter or say there instead of there? Well, it doesn't look very professional. And if you want to be taken really seriously as an author, you need your work to look slick and flawless. Mark my words. If there's a mistake and you haven't gone to the trouble of having it proofread, one of your readers will find it and let you know all about it. Here are a few examples of things that could go wrong. Typographical mistakes. There was once an algae duckling. It's easy to get letters around the wrong way, although now with spell checks on computers, it's harder to get that sort of thing wrong. Spelling errors. Apparently, Britain's most commonly misspelt word is separate. But equally, you might be using a word that's not in your spell checker. Perhaps the name of a place, for example. Or maybe you're using a made-up word that is very specific to your story. You need to make sure that that word is consistently spelt all the way through the story. Grammar. It was summer. Did you know that the seasons don't need a capital? That is really easy to get wrong. In other grammar mistakes, you might be missing out some punctuation or mixing up possessive and plural forms. Or you might wonder where to put me and where to put I. Mum and I went shopping, or Mum and me went shopping. By the way, the easy way to figure that one out is to take Mum out of the sentence and see if it still makes sense. I went shopping, or me went shopping. Well, the first one is obviously right, so put Mum back in and you've got Mum and I went shopping. Formatting. Your proofreader will look for too many spaces between words or paragraphs, or maybe even paragraphs that just seem too long. Or my favourite, using too much punctuation like exclamation marks, or maybe using capital letters inappropriately. But also they'll look for mistakes in typeface sizing. Perhaps you've used 14 point all the way through your book, apart from one page where you've used 12 point. They'll also notice any hanging widows or orphans. Google it if you don't know what that means. It's such fun! Before you send your manuscript off to your proofreader, make sure it's as good as you can possibly get it. Don't send your first draft off. Make sure you've done it to the best of your ability, because essentially it's just going to cost you more in the long run if it keeps coming back and going back to your proofreader. And here are a few words about what a proofreader will not do. They won't give you suggestions on your narrative. If your story is about a bird called Big Bum, they won't suggest that you change it to a cat called Janet. They probably won't pass comment on whether they like it or not, or whether they think it's age appropriate. That sort of thing is really down to you. They won't fact check your work. If you say that Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the British Parliament in 1605, it's up to you to make sure that that is right. They won't coach you. A proofreader is not a writing tutor. They won't be able to make you a better writer apart from checking out the mistakes that I've already talked about. They won't coach you on how to write like Lewis Carroll or give you advice on what rhymes with orange. If you are after a bit more help, perhaps with pace or flow or consistency, you might be looking for a freelance children's book editor. They will be able to give you more advice about what works in your story and what doesn't. However, as with purchasing all sorts of services, check out what the individual proofreader or editor will do for you. Check your contract, because some will be able to do things that perhaps others won't do. And importantly, make sure you hire somebody who's used to working in your genre. Don't hire someone who's used to proofreading or editing scientific journals if you're writing a book of poetry for 5 to 9-year-olds. My advice to you when you're starting out your project is to set aside a budget for a proofreader. It really does make the biggest difference to the experience for your reader. For example, if you make a big gaffe, it can be so distracting for your reader that they are just yanked out of your story. You want to be remembered for your amazing book and your amazing narrative, not for the spelling mistake you made. If you'd like further artist tutorials, I have a variety of short courses that will help you. There are real-time sessions looking at painting, drawing and marker pens, among others. And if you're keen on producing your own book, there is a more in-depth course on what you need to know about self-publishing a book with illustrations. And that covers making key decisions, how to make layouts and dummy books, rhythm and pacing, as well as several tutorials on illustrating your book, and a look at the tech. You can either hop over to my website or join me on Patreon for more information. Go on, give it a go! Next week we will be illustrating a children's fairy tale story. Until then, I'm off to bake some inedible cakes for my long-suffering and frankly hungry family. I'll see you next time. Nanu nanu!